Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of Hashtag Blind Talk. We've had some technical difficulties and we're ready to roll now. I'm pleased to be able to welcome in my regular co-host, TJ. TJ, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. And
Good.
today, special from across the pond, as they say, is our first international guest. Joe, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I didn't realise I was the first international guest. That's
You are.
amazing.
You are. I'm so
Alison-
excited.
Alison Disability Rights started to claim that she'd been all around the world, so she should technically be our first. But I reminded her that she is an American citizen and she doesn't qualify as an international guest. So
Exactly.
she'll be a bit feisty about that. But Joe, you are our number one international guest.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Well, I guess we usually just start off at diagnosis point as the first question, and so could you kind of run us through your diagnosis and how you learned about your vision loss and I guess that whole scenario?
Yeah, of course. So I have an inherited retinal disease called Leber's congenital amaurosis, which essentially is a very early onset infantile form of RP, retinitis pigmentosa. So I have always had a vision impairment. I was born with nystagmus. So my mum noticed quite early on that my eyes would shake involuntarily. And I also was born night blind. So I've never been able to see in the dark or in dim lighting. And I have always had a restricted visual field. So I had habilitation training from very young. I used a long white cane from the age of 4 because of how restricted my visual field was. However, my central vision was quite functional. I could get by in mainstream school with an additional light and a magnifying glass. We were told that my vision was stationary. So I was diagnosed with nystagmus, which I do have, and stationary night blindness, which I actually don't have. That was a misdiagnosis because at the age of 7 or 8, we noticed that my vision was deteriorating further. And to cut a very long story short, at 11, I was diagnosed with the condition that I do have, Leber's congenital amaurosis, and I was registered blind on the same day because of how rapidly my vision had deteriorated. It continued to deteriorate rapidly throughout secondary school. So I was diagnosed with the condition the final week in August, and then I began learning Braille the first week in September. And that's how rapid the progression was. So Braille really helped to carry me through secondary school. And I suppose I felt like a little bit like an empty shell after that point, because I think when my peers were discovering who they were and kind of developing their senses of identity as a young adult around that age, I felt like I was losing myself in every sense of the word. And it wasn't until I got my first guide dog at 18, just before I started university, that I actually started to kind of discover who I was and start to gain my independence, really.
Well, I think it's pretty jarring to be able to go through that in such a young age, but also so rapidly, right? As we've talked to a lot of people who have lost their vision a little bit later in life and got to do some of the things with the vision that they wanted to do, like maybe drive and things like that. But
Yeah.
at 11 to go through that so rapidly, it had to be, like you said, really deflating for you. What are ways, and before we kind of go that route, actually, I want to talk about the misdiagnosis, because this is a thing that TJ and I have talked about a lot. And I was just at a conference last week with about 30 families and parents of kids under 13. And
Yeah.
diagnosis was a big issue. And we had the head of the low vision clinic from Seattle Children's Hospital on the panel with us. And common misdiagnosis is so important to understand and talk about because there's so many cases of it. So when you were misdiagnosed the first time, and maybe you've spoken to your family about this to hear their perspective, what was that like when you eventually found out that that wasn't true?
I think because I was so young, it probably had more of an impact on my parents than what it did me. Because to me, although I was losing my vision impairment was normal. And around the time that I received an accurate diagnosis, I had already been experiencing deterioration for 4 years before that point. It was a long time coming. And I think in the room when I was diagnosed, the doctor, he kind of dilated my pupils. By this point, we were having a second opinion with an ophthalmologist, and he dilated my pupils, and he only looked in my eyes for a fraction of a second. He just let out this almighty sigh, and he said to my mum, "I'm really sorry. I don't know how this has ever been missed," because to him it was blatant. And I remember there was a fraction of a second, and she just burst into tears. And I was only young at the time, but in hindsight, it's almost like his words confirmed what she'd always thought. And
Yeah.
she was just waiting to hear it out loud. So I don't think she was shocked. And I think the upset was more relief that she finally knew what was going on and that everything kind of made sense at this point. I, as I say, I was very young, and I'd known that my vision was getting worse. But to me, I think it was more that, the consultant had said that because of how rapid the progression was, I likely wouldn't retain any functional vision beyond the age of 20. So we were talking 9 years from diagnosis to complete blindness. And to me, I wasn't thinking about learning Braille the following week. I started to think, well, what am I going to do as a job? I knew I wasn't going to be able to drive because I was already visually impaired, but I had enough functional vision to kind of think, well, I might go down this career path, or I'll manage raising a family, I'll be able to buy my own home. And then to think that the vision that I did have, that I was managing and coping very well with, was going to go. It was almost like everything had been pulled beneath me. And I'd wanted to be a midwife from the age of 3. I know
Right.
that's very young to want to be a midwife, but all of a sudden, I started to question that, and everything just, it was almost like my world had started to kind of tumble around me. I mean, I know I was very young, and at the time, I think I was more so focused on the impact it was having on my mum because of how upset she was. But it was more kind of the longer term worrying about life beyond childhood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
TJ, I think we've been through this so many times in the interviews that we've done, and from your perspective, I'm sure you can relate in a different way because you were diagnosed at an older age, but similarly, the shock of what that was comparatively to what Jo was talking about with her mother. There's always shock. Yeah, there's always
it is. There's always shock, and there's always the wondering and that sort of thing. But for me also, in learning my diagnosis, then things started to make more sense as to why, because I honestly went through life thinking I was just clumsy, or that, I just needed assistance when it was dark and that sort of thing. For some reason, I was different, and I always felt different. And I had absolutely no idea of the reasons behind it. So it all sorted starting to make sense, and I was, I'm like, well, this is exactly why I always have been the way that I've been, and I'm not actually clumsy. I just can't see that well. And now I have a definitive diagnosis, no matter what that looked like. At least I knew, and I kind of had to undo some of the things that I was thinking about myself, in the fact that, I was able to do athletics and things like that. It wasn't that I was clumsy. I wasn't tripping over my own 2 feet. There was an actual reason behind it. So, there's I think there's a two-way street when it comes to that, because you're thankful that but then you also wonder why it had not been diagnosed or seen previously, where you could have learned early on a little bit more. So I came to that crossroad as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have anyone in your family with Leber's? Is it?
No, it was very much out of the blue. It's quite a rare genetic mutation that I have. It's TULP1, which is also associated with retinitis pigmentosa as well. yeah, very, very much out of the blue. It's autosomal recessive, so both my parents carry a copy of the gene. But as far as we're aware, we went back through the family tree, and there's nobody being affected that we know of previously.
Same with me with retinitis pigmentosa.
Mhm.
Absolutely no one.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I know a family in Australia with three kids with retinitis pigmentosa, and then it just kind of skips a generation in between. So the genetic makeup of it is very particular, I think, in how it
It is.
manifests. Um, Joe, obviously, at 11, you have to grow up really quickly, and like you were talking about, think about how you're going to live the rest of your life and how you're going to adjust. I feel like that was me as well, and a lot of um, kids who have blindness and low vision at an early age really grow up quick because they have to adapt and change. Can you tell us about that journey for you in your kind of post-diagnosis and teenage years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That is very true in what you've said, because I often say I feel robbed of my adolescence.
Yeah.
So I did attend a mainstream secondary school, but it was out of town because there was a school about a 35-minute drive from my house in a different town that had a department for students with vision impairment, and they had a specialist qualified teacher for the visually impaired. And I needed to learn Braille, and I needed my lesson resources adapting. So I had taxi transportation funded. So I went to primary school in my hometown and then moved to a different town with a completely different cohort of students in secondary school. So already I knew that, socialising outside of school was out of the question, because I would travel back after school to my hometown. So I missed out on that aspect of socialising. And then also I feel like I couldn't really relate to my peers. So there were children in this school who'd been completely blind from birth, who already knew Braille. And then there were mainstream students the other side of me who were reading standard print. And I felt like I was on this bridge between the two. And I remember sitting in the classroom one day thinking, I'm going from this person on my right, and I'm going to end up in the situation of the person who's on my left. And everybody understood the students who had been visually impaired from birth, were severely visually impaired from birth. They knew from day one that they used Braille to access their lesson resources. And I felt like I was stuck between these two types of students, and I just felt so misunderstood, because I started school reading large print with a magnifying glass. I eventually moved on to using a laptop with speech, and then I moved on to full Braille, and it was just such a complex journey in such a short space of time that I couldn't even stop to process who I was or where I was in life. So it's no wonder that I felt like nobody else understood me either, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, it really does. I think,
yeah.
I'm in the same boat because I had about 2200 or 660 vision in the UK from kind of birth. And then when I was 12, I got cataracts on top of that. And I lost
Mhm.
kind of 14, 15. I lost more than half of my vision.
Yeah.
And so they took me to the school for the blind and wanted me to crash course Braille for 12 weeks. So I'm in a very similar position to you, where you could cope with large print and you could cope in the mainstream school, and then you go to a different environment. They want you to learn Braille. You still have useful vision, and you are caught in that middle ground. And I think that
Yeah.
that's a challenging situation because, like you said, the students understood if you're completely blind and you're walking around with a cane and you're using Braille all the time and that's what you've always done. But I think when you can see a little bit, like I used to be in the school rugby team and the school basketball team for high
Mhm.
school. And people would say, well, how can you go and play rugby and basketball, but you can't read the board? And so from my students' perspective, that was the hard part in explaining your vision. And to your point, you can't really explain because you do feel like you're somewhere in the middle in this kind of lost space. Um, Tell me, from a study point of view, how you dealt with that.
I was always very much a conscientious student, and I think that carried me through. So I am really, really grateful for that. I always wanted to do well academically. So I could quite easily switch off from the impact that it was having on my social life and just solely focus on my academic studies until it got to a point where I needed to use Braille full time. And at this point, I was 13 or 14, and I was your typical stubborn teenager. I did not want to accept any help or support. I just wanted to be like my sighted peers. So I refused to use Braille, and my academic performance took a real hit for a year. To the point where in my third year of secondary school, I was pulled out of external exams, and because it had had that much of an impact on me. And I think there are two times in my life where I can say I have felt true depression as a result of my sight loss, and that was one of them, because that was the point where I realised, okay, this is it. This is blindness. This is what I've been dreading. Um, and it was immediately after the teacher for the visually impaired said, right, we're going to start to use Braille in your lessons. And something clicked in my head, and I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I switched off from life. I stopped talking to people. I stopped eating. I shut myself in my bedroom. I wouldn't go out with my friends with my cane. Couldn't complete those exams, and everything just stopped. I kind of wasn't there. It's almost like everything was going on around me, but I wasn't moving forwards. I was just stuck. And it wasn't until I got the results back from my mock exams for the externals that I'd been pulled out of, that because I was such a conscientious student and I'd been told what my grades were and they'd dropped so dramatically, I thought, right, that's it. I'm not having it affect me in this way. Like, I want to do well in life. I want to be able to move forwards. And that was the real turning point for me, was kind of seeing my grades drop on paper, because not because I'd kind of stopped revising or I was lazy with education, just because I'd refused help and support. And I think that's one of the main turning points where I realised that actually accepting help and support would get me onto the path to independence. And that's when my grades started to improve again. I got accepted into sixth form college to study the subjects that I wanted to study, and that's when I started the application process for a guide dog as well. So that was the main turning point academically, really.
Well,
That's amazing.
yeah, it's a big turning point. And I think, again, through all of the stories we've just heard, that everybody has that moment, right, where they have a choice.
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
have to make the hard choice of coming to terms, or they don't, and they continue down that path that you were on at 16. And we kind of have spoken with people like Joey as an example, who didn't come to terms with it till much later in life, and that's a journey in itself, right? So
Mhm.
I think it's a powerful thing. TJ, what about from your perspective? What was your turning point where you kind of thought you had to accept it?
I think I'm a lot like Joe in the fact that one day I just realized that I didn't want to be, everyone else was moving forward and everyone else was living life. And I was sitting here looking at life via social media and living through others. And I finally decided, I am not getting any younger. And my mom passed away at 45 and had so much life to live and missed me having, a child and that sort of thing, and missed watching her grow up. And so my daughter was still young and I didn't want to rob her of things, of me not being a part of things. I didn't want to, and also I needed to set an example for her to know that no matter what, you need to push forward and be the best version of yourself and not let this define me. And so I think for me it was truly just realizing that, coming to terms after I had fully accepted what was going on and dealing with it internally. Then I stayed in a very dark place for a while, but I started to emerge, and it for me was very liberating to um, do O&M training, that because that gave me more of my independence that I felt like I had been stripped of, and just going going on about life like others were, and not letting fear stop me. And I was able to be a part of everything that my daughter was doing. I was at everything that she did, I was there for. And I'm very thankful for that. That pivotal turning point in my life, it was just huge.
Joe, what about your family during this time? So, obviously, mum had been and dad had been through it with you. Seeing your fall with your academics, and then obviously, the attitude of being pretty stubborn through this. How was that kind of impacting family life? And I know that you have a big family, and so kind of how did that play internally within the family?
So I am one of seven, and I was the fifth born sibling, and all of my siblings before me had full vision. So my mum had had 4 teenagers before myself. And it was probably very difficult for her to decipher what was just, your typical adolescent, being quite stubborn, and then what was kind of, was it coming from the sight loss itself, or was it just a complex mix of both? So I feel like I maybe had slightly more leeway than the others because of what I was going through.
Yeah.
However, my mum has always been of the mindset, she will say, "Oh, I've been cruel to be kind," and I know exactly what she means. Because there was also an incident where I was going out with my friends one day, and this was around the time that my grades had started to fall. As well as refusing to read Braille, I was refusing to use my long white cane. And my mum turned around and said to me, she said, "Your vision's not at a point now where you can refuse to use that, because you're going to go out and depend on your friends, and your friends are not always going to be there for you. So you either go out with your cane or you're not going out at all." And at the time I thought, that is absolutely shocking. How can you say that? That's so mean. But in hindsight, I'm so grateful she did that, because if not, I would have learned to depend on other people, and I wouldn't have been able to stand on my own 2 feet. And it just so happened that in the end I had to give in, because I thought, well, I really want to go out. I was 14. So I did use my cane this particular day, and it just so happened, which I think was just by chance, that I was jumped on in the street and attacked by a group of girls and boys who were slightly older than me. And at the time, I associated that with using the cane, which in hindsight, I don't think it was. But being the age that I was and how reluctant I was to use it, I just put the two and two together. And from that point forwards, I was, extremely reluctant, more so than I had been previously, to use it because of the incident. And my mum just sat me down one day and she said, "Look, I can completely appreciate that, you've got negative associations with the cane now, and because of the trauma of the incident, you don't want to use it. But," she said, "at the end of the day, you're only going to hinder yourself if you don't use any form of mobility aid. So you either choose to use a cane, or we'll contact Guide Dogs UK and start the ball rolling with that." And I said, "You know what, that's not a bad idea." Thankfully, I'm a dog lover, so I was quite on board with that. So we contacted Guide Dogs and started that process, which I'm very thankful that we did, because had she not sat me down and had the conversation, I don't think it's something that would have ever cropped up, that would have ever crossed my mind at that age. I didn't think I was old enough to get a guide dog. I'd never considered walking down the street with a guide dog. Like, I didn't think I was there. I didn't kind of put myself in that category, but actually I was. And I think it's because my vision had deteriorated so rapidly, and it's kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, that I couldn't keep up with it. I couldn't process the point at which I was at, because it was deteriorating so quickly at such a young age. And the minute we had that conversation, that was kind of another turning point for me with contacting Guide Dogs. So she was very fair, but she was quite strict in kind of ensuring that I got onto the path to independence as soon as possible.
I want to ask you about the incident, because I know that especially a lot of women and younger girls are fearful that it's a target, and can you talk to me about that feeling? And I know it must have been pretty traumatic for you. Like, how do you, and now you say, maybe it wasn't just the cane that caused that to happen, but those feelings of insecurity or being targeted because you look different or you look vulnerable, I think are real. And I'd love to kind of unpack that a little bit, because we do have a lot of younger ladies watching this podcast, and it's important to, I think, talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason it happened was this particular group had said that I was looking at them funny, that I'd pulled them quite a funny look. And I think in their minds, they probably thought, well, once she's got a cane, she shouldn't be able to see us. So it goes back to this whole public misconception that we're very aware of, that, you know, blindness is blindness and nothing else. We know blindness is a spectrum, but there's a public misconception that if you have any form of mobility aid that signals that you have blindness, you can't see anything at all. So I think there was probably some confusion there, that kind of caused this to happen. So in my mind, I thought, well, how am I supposed to act? Because at that time, I had a lot more functional vision than what I do now. I had a very restricted visual field, which was why I was using a cane. But, you know, I could recognize faces still at this point. Even if I'd walk into a lamppost because of my peripheral vision, but I could still recognize someone's face who was close enough to me. And I thought in my mind that that is going to confuse people. And if that is what's caused this, that's potentially putting me in a very vulnerable position. And I was trying so hard to, you know, develop my independence in time for young adulthood. So it kind of threw me back because I thought, I can't do right for doing wrong here. I'm trying my best to get out there like my sighted peers are, and kind of do accept the support and the help that I need in order for me to do that. But that's confusing people, and then it makes me feel even more vulnerable, if that makes sense. So I went through a phase of feeling like, well, what is the point in even getting out there and trying if I'm just having these setbacks? But I think when I got the guide dog, that was kind of like a turning point for me, as I mentioned earlier, because I feel like we all are either cane users or guide dog users. I think I know the odd person. It's very rare that somebody's very comfortable using both, but I think there's a lot of trial and error involved, and it's finding what you feel comfortable with and what you feel safe with. And the minute I picked up a guide dog harness, I thought, this is me. I'm unstoppable here because I feel safe, I feel confident, I feel secure, and my dogs just feel like an extension of me. And I know for a lot of people that they can get to that point with the cane as well. I unfortunately never did, but I know that some people do, and I think there's something that works for everybody. And it was just a lot of trial and error, to get to that point and to feel comfortable and to feel confident. And I think as a young female, you do kind of, you know, you worry about these things. But I just think the more you get out there and the more you do things and the more you tackle life, it starts to feel like the norm, and you stop worrying about it in time. Um, I think that's what helped me, is just getting out there every day. And, you know, this was a one-off incident. Nothing has ever happened like that since.
Yeah.
So for a long time, it was in the back of my mind. But the more I just pushed through life and thought, no, I'm getting out there and I'm tackling it, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to allow what happened on that day in that group of teenagers to stop me from living my life.
So important, I think, to understand that. And I see so many youth that we work with that are not independent and haven't made that decision to be independent, and parents worry and talk to me about how can the best separation happen. And I think it's a very individual journey, honestly. It's not the same for any two people. And your advice about getting out there and really pushing yourself is one that I adhere to as well. I say, look, you have to fail sometimes before you succeed, and trying is really the important thing. And even at your stage, TJ, where you lost your vision and you had to stop driving at night and do things differently and start to use the cane. Like, we all go through that in the blind spectrum. And you're right, people in the mainstream don't understand that spectrum very well at all. And there's a lot of ignorance around that. And so I'm so pleased for you that your guide dog gave you that independence. And I've seen other young women who have made that decision at an early age and felt really liberated by using a guide dog. And so it is a very individual journey that I think isn't a cut and paste model. It has to be a decision individually with the family and yourself to be able to make that choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
TJ, do you want to take us through the college years, the university years?
Yes, I'd like to know So you said you got your guide dog at 18. What happened from there whenever you got accepted into your college years, and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, so I was matched with my very first guide dog, who was called Bubbles, in March 2012. I was completing my final college exam, so guide dogs were very supportive, and they actually held her back until July, so that we could complete training once my final exams had been completed. So once I'd concluded my college year, I know college is university for you guys, isn't it? College was kind of like further education for us just before university.
Gotcha.
I trained with Bubbles in July. We qualified mid-August, and then I started my undergraduate degree in September. So it was very quick.
Yeah.
I'd kind of just qualified with her, and our route to the university, I didn't actually move and live on campus. I travelled, and that route was kind of my first ever independent route, just because of how old I was when I lost my vision. So when I got my first guide dog, I gained my independence. I didn't regain it because I'd never really developed it in the first place. So it was quite overwhelming initially, but I think because of how conscientious I was and how well I wanted to do and how much I was kind of looking forward to studying the subject, that was a distraction for me, really.
Mhm.
And everything just naturally fell into place. I had some difficulties at the university with accessing resources. So I was used to reading Braille by this point. You know, I'd gotten very comfortable with that. I completed all my college exams in Braille. And then there was a funding issue. So I very quickly had to learn how to fully rely on speech software. I'd have my exams transcribed into Braille, but other than that, all of my coursework was speech. So I had a real whistle stop course on using speech to access kind of journal articles and things like that, which in hindsight I'm grateful for, because you can obviously get a lot more done relying on speech rather than relying on Braille. But that first year was just a real whirlwind, because not only was I getting used to studying at an undergraduate level, and I was studying psychology as well, which is quite a complex subject area. I was kind of trying to enjoy that, but trying to get to grips with speech, trying to get used to kind of the social side of things. And up until this point, I hadn't really socialized outside of education because I didn't have the means to. You know, my school and my sixth form college were both out of town, so I would get a taxi home, and my friends would kind of still be in this other town. Whereas now I had the opportunity to travel independently and go out with friends, and I'd never really done that, not fully until this point. So everything was kind of happening all at once, if that makes sense, which I'm very grateful for in hindsight, because I learned it all kind of in that 1 year. And then by my second year of my degree, I'd say that's probably when I felt the most comfortable and the most confident in my own skin. I'd settled with my guide dog. I was really, really enjoying the subject. I'd made a good group of friends. I was getting kind of good life, but a good balance between studying and the social side of things. So yeah, I think after we'd got through that first year, things started to settle down and feel like the norm then.
It's hard enough, I think, whenever you transition from your high school years going into college, university, that sort of thing. Like, it's hard enough as it is for every child, right? Like, because
Mhm.
you're going through the changes of life of living at home, and you've had everything, kind of provided around you and that sort of stuff, and then you go to
Yeah.
quickly being on your own, and then you're having to study in a different way, and you're having to make different friendships, and you're having to navigate all of these new things. So I think the college life experience is enough within itself to cause anxiety, right? Like, I know my daughter, her first year
Mhm.
of college was ones of ups and downs, and she would call me crying one week and then call me the next week and was very happy. So it was that balance. And I think throwing what you were going through on top of that, I mean, it's just, I can't imagine all the changes you had to face doing that. So that it's amazing that you were able to find your way. Were there resources readily available for you there? Like, were they eager to assist you with the different things that you needed to make sure that your classes went well for you? And were you like in a minority of people on campus with a vision impairment?
Yeah, so I was the only person that I knew of who had been through the psychology school at this particular university. And thankfully, because my lecturers were psychologists, they were naturally very caring and compassionate people. So they did everything in their power to support me. I had a meeting prior to my degree with the disability services at the university, and they kind of sat down and laid out everything that they could put into place. And I feel like that was very much under false pretenses, because when I did commence the course, a lot of that was stripped back. I'm not sure if there was a problem with the funding that year, but I feel like they promised a lot that they never delivered on. And that was quite worrying until my psychology school stepped up and said any gaps that they leave, we'll fill. So they were absolutely amazing. So a lot of the funding for the resources that I needed came out of the psychology school's budget rather than the disability services department, which is not right. But I am so, so grateful that I had such a supportive team of staff around me in my lecturers. And that's probably because of the field that they were in. And then in addition to that, because of it was psychology, a lot of, my fellow students, that they kind of were of the same mindset. And I'd been used to being in a school where I didn't feel understood. And then all of a sudden I was surrounded by, there were mature students on the course, and, people just kind of took you under their wing. And I finally felt like I was being heard. But it is right what you're saying, when you go from childhood and education, where you have specialist teachers and parents and everybody fighting for your rights and ensuring that you have everything in place, to all of a sudden being thrown out into the big wide world and you've got to self-advocate. That was a journey.
Yeah.
I think self-advocacy is a really important point to touch on, because you've had to advocate for yourself, throughout your life, and have as well. And it not only, makes you more mature, but it helps you, I think, be able to understand a little bit better about what the reasonable accommodations could be. And to your point, when you don't get those, then you're able to, I think, pivot a little bit better than if you've never done that and never done that at a younger age. And so becoming more mature gives you that perspective about change that you need. And it also makes you more self-aware. It's interesting that you chose psychology, because I think that's a part that a lot of people with blindness and low vision go down, because they maybe have not had the empathy and the understanding throughout their years, and they want to be able to give that, and they also want to understand that. Can you talk to us about that choice to choose psychology?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, earlier in childhood, I always wanted to go into kind of midwifery or paediatric nursing, and it got to a point where I knew that wasn't going to be possible. So I did always kind of want to go into a healthcare profession in one way or another. And I, was looking through the courses at college once I'd finished school, and I chose to study health and social care, English literature, and psychology. And the minute I started to study psychology, I absolutely fell in love with it. I thought it was so fascinating that you could kind of interpret things in your own way, and just, learning about human behavior. And I think a lot of what you've said there is right, that, you do become very self-aware, and in turn that makes you quite interested in other people and how they behave. And it just all kind of linked up with wanting to go into the healthcare profession. So then I started looking at the different branches of clinical and educational, and educational psychology linked up a lot with vision impairment. So I studied that for a long time. Then there was kind of clinical health psychology is what I studied my master's in eventually, because I was volunteering in the hospital at the time. And everything just fascinated me about the subject, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, to the point where I didn't actually feel like I was studying. It felt more like a hobby because I was that fascinated by it. Yeah.
Tell us about, because we have obviously a lot of American listeners, and probably the systems are very different. And of course, I'm from Australia, where we kind of come out of the English system a lot. Tell us about the support system for blindness and low vision in the UK, and in your area where you were living at the time and going to university. How was the transport system? You talked about traveling to and from university. What was those two functionalities?
Yeah, so in terms of kind of mainstream education, when I was in education, it was, you know, kind of the gold standard. It was, the team were very supportive, so there was a lot of funding. Each student who was diagnosed as having a disability would have something in place called an education healthcare plan. So that would kind of state what our needs were, what we needed in place, and we essentially each had a pot of funding, and that could cover things like Braille displays, Braille exams, one-to-one support in class if that was needed. We had, if you were a Brailleist, you had 100% extra time for your exams. So they took the, you know, the additional time that it required for you to complete those, that was taken into consideration. And if you had one of these plans in place, it protected you up until the age of 25, which is amazing. So as long as you remained in education, you could be supported by your local special educational needs and disabilities team, where there was a qualified teacher for the visually impaired who was always on hand. So that was brilliant. And then once I started to study at university, there was something called disabled student allowance. So that would help to kind of cover the cost of transport, which I never accessed. I think I just got my guide dog, so I was adamant I wanted to travel on public transport and practice on trains and things like that. I could have gained funding for a taxi if I wanted to, but I really wanted to kind of get out there and practice on public transport. So there was travel, technology, and then lesson transcription. And then you could also apply to have a one-to-one assistant in lectures who could kind of note take and help you with reading and things like that. That was available. So the support here it's unbelievable. It was at the time when I was there anyway.
Yeah, I think, just accessing that, and again, the decision to be able to accept those services makes a huge difference in your adult life.
Yeah.
And if you kind of put your hand up and say, I don't want to be a part of anything related to blindness, then your journey is going to be so much more difficult than if you access resources that can make things a lot easier. I think about Mandy, who was on this, and in our room yesterday when we were on TikTok in your live, and Mandy talked for years about just struggling in her job, not asking for resources, and then finally making the decision to say, hey, I need these adaptions, and made her life so much easier. And sometimes we fight with the internal because we think it changes who we are, but it doesn't change who you are to ask for assistance and get adaptions. So I'm really pleased to hear stories about where people have made that decision at an early age, because it really impacts more effectively and efficiently their later life, I think, in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it kind of relates back to masking as well. And when I had enough functional vision, I would mask as far as I possibly could. I would accept. I got to a point where I would accept support where it was needed, but if I could get away with it, I would mask. And it got to a point where that was no longer possible, and I realised that in masking, I was causing more problems than what I was if I eventually just accepted and admitted that I'd gotten to the point where I needed non-visual means to carry out almost every daily task, and that I couldn't get away with maximising the use of my residual vision anymore, or pretending that I was maximising my residual vision when actually there was not enough there to do that. So yeah, I went through a huge masking stage for a very long time, which I know a lot of other people do as well. I have a lot of discussions with other visually impaired people around that topic.
Masking never stops, I think.
Never.
Even when we're just doing anything, there's a degree of masking that happens internally within us. And I was thinking about that the other day when I was driving with my wife and we were in the car. And she said, I think maybe you're losing some vision, because I think there's some things that I thought that you could see that you can't see. And again, it just kind of, again, felt like, well, maybe I have to prove how much I can see, which is, ridiculous. We've been married for 24 years, and she probably knows more about my vision than I do. But it never stops to a degree, right? We're always have that internal little thing that tells us, "Hey, I have to mask, or I have to prove how much I can see, or I don't see as badly as other people think I see," type of thing. So never stops.
Never.
Yeah, I mean, my partner and I have been together for 3 years, and still to this day, he'll go to show me a photo and he'll say, "Hang on," he tries his best, bless him. He'll say, "I'll put my brightness all the way up." So I turn his brightness all the way up, and he puts it right in my face, and he's like, "Can you see that?" And I just go, "Oh yeah, that's great." And I think, oh, it's just easier.
TJ, what questions do you have about many more questions about university? And then do you have questions about the career stuff?
Yes, I do. I want to know where you went career-wise after you finished. We've gotten through your college years and what was provided, which I think that's amazing. Everything that was available to you to assist you. That's I think that's far more than what we have here, and I'm glad to hear that. So, what happened from there after you gained your degree?
So immediately after my master's degree, I actually stayed on in the psychology school. There was a post that came up as a research assistant within that school. So I remained there, which I think really kind of helped me to transition from higher education to employment, because I was in exactly the same environment with the same members of staff, but in kind of a different role, if that makes sense. So that was huge in kind of helping me to make that transition, because up until this point, I hadn't. A lot of my sighted peers worked part-time in McDonald's, or fast food chains, or retail, and as you know, with vision impairment, those hands-on jobs are very, very difficult. So I'd never done anything like that really up until this point. That was like my first proper job aside from volunteering. So that was kind of my first graduate job. I then had a little bit of a break because I was diagnosed with cataracts. I had some other health problems going on, and I was waiting on kind of 3 different types of surgery. So that kind of set me back a little bit. And then when everything had stabilized, and I was starting to accept the further sight loss that I'd had, I started to look around for other things. And I was very torn as to whether I wanted to go down the educational route with psychology, or whether I wanted to go down the clinical route. So I was applying for jobs in hospitals and schools, and a job came up in a school working within the special educational needs and disabilities department, and part of that role was Braille transcription. So they were quite keen to get me on board, and I was quite keen to start work by this point. So I thought, well, I'll take that and see where that takes me. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. I stayed in this role for 5.5 years. And that took me right up until I think 2021. So I was working in the school during COVID. And then after COVID, we returned, and things just didn't feel the same in school because of all of the changes that had taken place. And do you know when something just doesn't feel quite right? And at this point, I was still living at home with my mum, so I didn't really have any kind of major financial outgoings to worry about. So I thought, I'm going to drop to part-time at the school, and I'm going to start looking around for other things, because I feel like I've exhausted education by this point, and I was going off the idea of going down the educational route. So I started to apply for psychological wellbeing practitioner roles, and just basically anything that could get me into a hospital. As it happened, I dropped to 2 days in the school, and a 3-day role came up as an eye care liaison officer. I'm not sure if you have anything similar to this in the US or Australia. I'd be quite interested to know, actually. But basically, the eye care liaison service offers a bridge between ophthalmology in the hospital and external services. So we can see patients and support them at the point of diagnosis, offer emotional support, practical support, and then refer them on to, say, orientation and mobility, counselling, anything that can kind of help them to, get on the pathway to regain their independence. So that bridge is essential. And I thought, well, that's going to allow me to gain the experience that I need in a clinical setting, but also I can empathise with these patients at the deepest level, and it's going to be such a rewarding role. And up until this point, I'd only really worked with children in school. So the role, I I work with newborns right up until to the elderly. It's right across the lifespan. So it was really interesting to get an experience working with adults. So I started that role, and then I picked that up full time not long after I'd started, and I'm still in that role now. So I've been doing that role for 5 years, and I absolutely love it. It's so incredibly rewarding.
I think
Yeah, that's
there's,
basically where I'm up to career wise.
there's not really a role like that in the United States or really Australia. It's more, everything's around job placement, and so for younger families, there's I think I talked about earlier. We had the low vision clinic manager from Seattle Children's Hospital, and so the major children's hospitals that have an ophthalmology department usually have a low vision clinic, or what we call a low vision clinic, but that is more functional than emotional support. And honestly, they might do an afternoon in practice once a week, and so they might see 3 people. So the wait lines are months and months to be able to get into something like that. It is, I think, something that's really needed, both for parents and also for kids and adults, because the referral system here is a bit antiquated. It's a very like an institutionalized model still, where you have the state agency for blindness and low vision offering services, but they're not always connected to the hospital systems or the school systems. And the TVIs, or the I don't know what you call them, but the assistant vision teachers in the United States are a separate entity with the school district. So nobody's really connected very well, which is a challenge, because then the support system is not there holistically for parents and students.
No, it is not. And it's, in every other field, it is available. We have, my career is healthcare. And so I work alongside nurse management. We have those liaisons when you're inpatient in the hospital for various things and you're needing to transition to a higher level of care or a different level of care for follow-up appointments. Say you're in for cardiology. Everything is lined up for you when you are discharged from the hospital for these necessary appointments. But we do not have anything like that. I know in South Carolina, we have very few hospitals that have ophthalmology. Our largest one is in Charleston, South Carolina, and that's the MUSC Storm Eye Institute. And so everything is right there. I went to see them for a second opinion, and I don't know that they have any services outside of diagnosing to speak of within there. You're basically on your own to figure out where your resources come from. I know I had to figure it out for myself.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
It's definitely a challenging environment. And, Australia has the NDIS system, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the NDIS system in Australia, Joe, but it's a self model. So you go and see an agency and then basically talk about what you need. And then you either do or don't receive funding for those things. And then you manage your funding plan with that agency. So it's a very independent model, very different from what the United States is, and maybe different from what the UK is.
Wow. I didn't realize that you didn't have a service like that. And that absolutely blows my mind to think that you could go in and receive a diagnosis and then just be asked to leave the hospital with no information whatsoever. It makes me feel very, very grateful that we have that service here, and that I'm part of it.
I think hospitals, they do, like in Australia, before I left, I was the CEO of Disability Sports Australia, and we would go into hospitals and do training with clinicians to be able to have some of that resource. But it wasn't given through like the government. It was independent agencies going in and doing training and then offering support. And I think it's so vital. I did it in Sydney Children's, and I think like the clinicians were really hungry for it, but it wasn't there as a system. So That's a massive plus for the UK to be able to have
Yes.
that, because it starts parents on a journey. And I just hear so much, especially here in the States. Parents come home, they start Googling, they don't know where to start.
Hmm.
It's a slippery slide then to be able to pick which service is going to be better, and they can't even have a conversation about it. So it's a real challenge across the world, I think.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I feel like a diagnosis of vision impairment, I think we touched on this earlier, is made so much worse when there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think, however difficult the diagnosis, if you know what you're dealing with and you know what's ahead and you know what support is in place, you kind of, you know what the steps are that you can take to kind of start to get on track with things. But when you don't know where to turn and you're not given any information, it can feel, the impact can feel tenfold.
Hmm.
Uncertainty always kind of throws you off.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Well,
Yes.
I think we covered the hard parts. Now we can have a little bit of fun. Uh, Love to know a little bit about like some of your interests and your hobbies, and how you've pursued them.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a child, I was always very interested in gymnastics, trampolining. That was when I had a lot more vision. And then as I was losing my vision, I had the crazy idea of figure skating because I used to watch, we have a show here called Dancing on Ice that Torval and Dean used to
Yeah.
run. And I was watching it and I was like, Mum, I love this. And she took me ice skating one day and the rink was empty and the guy there had turned all of the lights up. And I went skating and I didn't have my cane. I wasn't holding on to everybody. And I was like, I'm free. She was like, you love it, don't you? I was like, yeah. She was like, oh dear. So I
I've
started
unleashed the
private lessons.
monster.
Yeah. So I started private lessons and I think because I'd already done gymnastics, I kind of took to it quite quickly. And the coach I had was amazing. She used to describe everything. She would wear black clothing so I could see her on the ice with the contrast, and then she'd film herself like doing kind of jumps and performance spins so that I could take it home and watch it on my TV so I could learn it myself. So that I found that really accessible at the time. So I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I actually didn't drop that until I studied my masters, and it wasn't my vision. It was just because I didn't really have the time to practice. Then I got into running. So I completed a half marathon with a colleague at the time. We had like one of the RNIB tethers and we ran that together for Retina UK.
Hmm.
Then I developed shin splints, so I decided running was no longer for me. We
Right.
called the half marathon the Great North Run, but it ended up being more like the Great North Walk because I had
Right.
cataract surgery like 6 weeks before.
Oh,
So I didn't get an awful lot of training time, but I tried my best. Um, then I got more into the gym after that. So I kind of gave up running and I started strength training. So I feel like I've always been interested in fitness in one way or another. Funnily enough, having never tackled really any dedicated blind sports. I know we had a conversation about this with tennis, didn't we?
yeah.
And I now have the tennis sound ball. So we're going to give that a go because I had a personal trainer last year at the gym and I got really into strength training, but then I had my accident at the beginning of the year and sustained a spinal fracture. And I think it's just really shifted my perspective that I really kind of want to get into more things fitness wise compared to what I was doing before. So I'm kind of throwing myself into all sorts of different things at the minute. And then in addition to that, I really love travel. I don't know what it is about travel. And people say to me, well, how can you enjoy visiting other countries so much when you can't see? And I'm like, it's not just about sightseeing, there's culture and meeting other people. There's a lot more to it. So yeah, we do travel a lot. We've fallen in love with cruising recently, actually.
Hmm.
It's interesting. I was in your live room yesterday, and your partner was very enthusiastic about the trip, and you were talking about it as well. And my wife is scared of fish, and so she doesn't want to go on a cruise because she thinks she's going to get stranded in the middle of the ocean and have to deal with fish. So I'm slowly talking her around to cruising. We're hopefully going to Greece next year and going to do a Greek Islands cruise, which is kind of the kickoff. So hopefully that will be great, and then we can
Oh,
cruise.
amazing.
But tell us about some of your favorite destinations that you've been.
So city wise, I think my favorite destinations have been Rome and Budapest in Hungary. They were amazing. I think I loved Budapest so much because it felt, for a capital city, it was very accessible. It was predominantly flat. The streets were very wide. It was open. There was a huge park, and it didn't feel busy. Rome reminded me of London, like in terms of the amount of people there. It was like London on steroids, Rome. As you can imagine, I expected that before we went, but the day we were there, it was 37 degrees, and there's people everywhere. And you know, when you just feel very overwhelmed trying to navigate somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were definitely my two favorite cities. And then we also visited somewhere on a one of our cruise ships. It was our very first cruise, actually. We visited Italy in the south of France, and we were traveling to Monaco on this particular day, but the cruise docked in a port called Villafranche. It was absolutely gorgeous. My partner was kind of describing the coastline to me, and there were the kind of houses built into the cliffs, and the coastline was absolutely beautiful. And we fell in love with it. So I definitely want to go back there because we walked through it for 10 minutes to get to the train station,
Right.
and then again to get back onto the ship. And I said, "Oh, I wish we'd stayed here."
Yeah,
So
right.
I think we're planning on visiting there again.
It's funny, you kind of find those gyms that you
Yeah.
expect, right, when you're doing that kind of stuff.
That's the beauty of cruising, really, is you think you're going for certain itineraries, and then you stop in certain ports, and you think, I would never have considered coming here had it not been, somewhere that we docked. So it is amazing.
And what about that social perspective? Yeah, how'd you meet your partner? Kind of, let's talk about that first. How'd you meet your partner?
So we met on a dating app, which I know there's a lot of controversy around with vision impairment at the moment, but it was actually quite a positive experience. So I had just bought my own house. And as I say, I'm one of seven. So I'd moved out of a very busy household. And I remember this day I was sat in my little living room on my own, surrounded by empty cardboard boxes. And it was a Saturday, and I thought, what do I do with my life now? It's too quiet. And I was really looking forward to this stage of just having some peace to myself. And it was the first weekend in the house, and I thought, oh, what am I going to do? So I downloaded a dating app. And here we are 3 years later. I had it for the day. I think he was the first person I matched with. And he says, I saved you from so much misery on that app. And we're still together 3 years later. So yeah, it actually worked out really well.
Well, I'm an online dating advocate as well, because Tammy and I met online back in
Oh, really?
2001, and she, luckily I was Australian because she wanted to come to Australia, and so she was looking for Aussies to chat to, and she random messaged me. Didn't only saw that I was Australian, really, and then we started talking, and she came over, and I must have been a pretty good tour guide because here we are 24 years later.
Oh,
Aw.
that's amazing. That's really lovely.
What else do you think is important to talk about? I love that you continued to be fit and out there, and I have to tell you about the ice skating because I'm very impressed. I took a date on an ice skating, and I'd never been ice skating before, which was my first mistake. To take a date out to an ice skating rink, and she was actually quite a good ice skater, and it was the most humiliating date I've ever been on in my life. Like, hold my hand and we'll go across the ice. I'm like, okay. And I must have fallen down 3 times just going across the ice. It was very, I'm like, no more ice skating for me. It wasn't a great experience. But, typically people with blindness and low vision have poor balance and coordination. And so I'm interested about ice skating for you. You must be this rare person that's come out with pretty good balance and coordination. Tell me about that journey.
Yeah, so I was quite powerful with jumps, but now you mention that, I did really struggle with spins. So when we span, we had to be on a certain point on the blade and remain on that point, and sometimes it would kind of shift. And I remember speaking with my coach, my consultant at the time, and he did say, yes, it can really kind of impact on your balance. So I did feel the impact of it a little bit, but I just tried to kind of fight through it as best I can. But it is a really interesting one because I found that the more vision I lost, the more I was very kind of unsteady on my feet and just uncoordinated. Even just kind of walking down the street, I would struggle to walk in a straight line. And I would just kind of veer off over to the side randomly.
Right.
I used to think, what on earth is going on? And then also my memory as well. My memory became very much affected. But as you know, we don't have the visual cues that sighted people do, and that there are so many cognitive demands placed on us, and there's only so much capacity that your short-term memory has. So yeah, I realised my memory was really impacted as well. So
And
yeah,
that's interesting because, like you said, we just remember everything, right?
Yeah.
About where we are, landmarks. Tammy's always like, I don't know how you remember all of this stuff. I'm like, well, it's just the way it is. It's the only way I can get through life. So I have to have good memory. But how about you, TJ? Like, how since diagnosis, have you seen any like balance coordination challenges?
Always. I always have issues with that. Yes. And I do find myself kind of swaying from when Lee and I are walking side by side and, I'm using my cane, but I'm also holding on to him. Um, it almost felt like he was kind of tugging on me in a certain, but it was me drifting. So it really, I do struggle with that. And also closing my eyes, I find when I wash my hair in the shower, closing my eyes and laying my head back. And when I then look forward, everything's kind of, gone crazy for a second. I struggle with that as well. And I think after diagnosis, it was another one of those aha moments where it all kind of made sense why that I've always had that issue.
Yeah, I think these are things that everybody has in different ways, right, with different
Right.
conditions. And it's interesting how they kind of come out and show themselves. When, Joe, when you're working with families and clients, and you said you've got quite a spectrum of age, what kind of commonalities are you finding? Obviously we've got people listening at home and thinking to themselves, well, what's my situation? What sort of things do I need to think about in that environment of making that first step to kind of come to terms with and change what I'm going to do to prepare? Are there things that you think are really important to think about?
Yes, I think the main theme that I've realised after being in this role for 5 years, and it's strange how it changes your perspective on vision impairment, even though I've lived with it for 31 years, and when I watch other people going through it, it's not a one size fits all. Everybody's experiences are so different. But the one thing I've came to realise is that until you've gotten to a level of psychological acceptance, there is no level of practical rehabilitation that can ever help you, because until you feel ready to help yourself and that you're in a mindset, in a headspace where you can move forward and you're ready to accept that support, until you've accepted the fact that you do have this level of sight loss and that it is permanent and that's not going to be cured, and until you are at peace with that, that is then the point that you can start with rehabilitation training and start to learn to use a long light cane, and have aids in the kitchen and have kind of these aspects of support in place that are going to enable you to move forward and live independently. And I always say to people, sight loss isn't essential, it's just convenient, and it's not necessarily the end of the road, it's just a different way of living, and it can take every person a completely different time frame to kind of relearn how to live and to relearn how to do the basic things in life. But once you do that, and once you start to practice these things every day, it starts to feel like a new normal, and you will get to a point where you sort of forget how you managed previously with more vision. And once it starts to feel like the new normal, you can then just kind of settle and move forward. And obviously we always have our down days, but I think it can get to a point where you have more good days than bad. And I think if you get to that point, then you're winning in life.
Yeah, I think you're right on. There's no quick fix or super thing that you're going to do that's going to completely make everything okay. And it's utilizing that toolbox that we've talked about, a lot, where you just have things that can make life easier at different points that helps on a day-to-day basis. One thing that I did want to talk to you about, Joe, was the app that you were using, and I think the UK does a really great job with disability holistically, and how you look at disability. And you did a post on your TikTok page a couple of weeks ago about this app, and I just love it and would love to see it come to the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this has been produced by, it's an AI agent and it's been produced by a company called Visually Sonic. So the AI agent itself is called Visually Sonic Sense, and essentially it was developed in with businesses and public venues in mind, so that not just people with vision impairment, but any individual with a disability or with an accessibility need can essentially call a helpline in advance of attending a public venue and ask it questions around the accessibility of the venue. So it can let you know, for example, whether or not the venue is step free, what the lighting levels are like, whether or not there's an accessible toilet. It can even explain whereabouts in the venue the accessible toilet is. It can escalate you to a member of staff if you need any further information, or you need kind of human interaction. It's the agent is 24/7, so you could call it at 3 a.m. on the way to the airport and ask about the accessibility of the airport that you're traveling with. It's an amazing tool, and I have been working with the business for about 12 months now. So I tested the accessibility of the product when they were kind of in the testing phase. And then obviously it's very recently launched, hence the video that you saw on TikTok. And we're now just kind of waiting for it to be rolled out further. So it's dependent on individual businesses picking it up really. And hopefully, we see it rolled out across more venues moving forward. It's extremely exciting.
Yeah, I think just hearing the call and hearing the agent and the information that you were getting is so valuable. And I know that more and more when I'm traveling somewhere, I'm doing the research now. I just went to the US Open tennis in New York last year, and I got on YouTube and I looked at the route on the train from Times Square out to the tennis and which stop I'd have to hover. I had someone show me basically on a video when you enter Penn Station when you enter Times Square station in this way, you go down the stairs, you walk this way to the platform to catch the train. So I was really familiar with basically what I had to do, and it just made life so much easier than turning up and trying to figure it out. And so I'd love to see that app transition to other parts of the world like the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely fantastic. And I just think it will settle people's minds because, as you say, we have this tendency to, try to research a venue as much as we possibly can in order to determine the accessibility of it in advance. And this is just something that you have at your fingertips. And if venues are on board with it, you can gain that information any time of the day, and it's highly detailed as well. I mean, often you'll call a venue and you'll be passed from person to person, and quite often they don't have the answers.
Right.
Um, but yeah, this is absolutely fantastic, and I am super excited for it to be rolled out further.
Well, keep us up to date about that. And if they
I
ever want
will
to do a
do.
trial here in the United
Yes.
States, I'm on board to help them get it.
Yes.
For sure.
Same.
I think it also talks about the ignorance that exists in mainstream and helps break down that, right? Because if you're talking to a venue about accessibility, then it's front of mind, and they start to think, okay, if a lot of people start to show up with blindness and low vision, or some other form of disability, that there's a big market out there, especially for restaurants, as an example, where people do want to go out, they do want to be in a social setting, but there's challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And that there are so many barriers to accessibility, and those barriers could be the difference between whether a person attends a venue or whether they decide to stay at home. So to be able to access that information, for it to be kind of readily available. And I think the privacy element of it as well, because you don't have to speak to another human. I'm quite confident nowadays if I need to find out accessibility information, I can happily ring, but not everybody is at the point in the journey that I am. And
Right.
if you'd have asked me that question 10 years ago, there is not a chance that I would have spoken to another human. I wouldn't have been able to pluck up the courage to ring and say, do you have an accessible toilet? Or, is there enough space for my guide dog? I wouldn't have dreamt of it. I'd have rather have stayed home. And depending on which point you are at in your journey, there'll be a lot of people who are at that stage.
Yeah.
So the thought of being able to just contact an AI agent where you don't have to share and disclose personal information with another human, I think that's a great element of it as well.
And you got a lot of feedback from your video about your guide dog. in the restaurant and being carded that I saw. And so I think this is such a common problem, certainly here with Ubers and Lyfts, a massive problem with guide dogs. And then in restaurants. And I think because now there's a lot of service animals coming into play everywhere you are, that need for carding and things like that has kind of taken place because of the prevalence of service animals broadly. When it used to just be guide dogs, I think that it wasn't maybe as bad, but now, people are kind of wanting to make sure that it's a registered service animal. And so I'm interested in your take on that, and then what you think might be some solutions or things that have been trialled in the UK that maybe people don't know about here in the United States.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point and a real prevalent problem at the moment. So basically what you're referring to is I recently had an access refusal at a very popular pub chain here in the UK. And prior to this access refusal, I had never had a problem with this pub chain. Their staff couldn't have been more supportive. I would walk in, and if the tables were tightly packed together, they would move furniture, they would offer my guide dog bowls of water. They were amazing. And funnily enough, I was having a conversation with a visually impaired friend a couple of weeks back, who's recently qualified with her guide dog. And she said, "Oh, I'm really apprehensive about attending this particular pub chain because I've heard really negative feedback from guide dog owners with kind of access refusals." So I said, "Well, that's really strange because I've always had a positive experience." Now, I've been hibernating in my home for about 5 months because of my spinal fracture. So I'm just starting to get out and about now. And as it happened on this particular day, me and my partner were going to work my guide dog in harness for the first time in 5 months. And en route, we said, "Oh, should we pop in here and grab some breakfast?" So we did, not expecting any problems at all because I've never had a problem in this particular place. And the employee had approached and she asked for a registration card. And initially, I didn't really know what she was referring to because I've been a guide dog owner for 14 years, never been asked to provide proof or evidence of the fact that she is a working dog.
Yeah.
So I told her that I didn't have it with me, and she said, "Well, we need it. It's our policy." And I said, "Well, not really. It conflicts with the Equality Act. She's got a full Guide Dogs UK working harness on. It's fluorescent. It's got nationally recognised logos on it. There was a corresponding flash on her lead. There was a bold, large print sign on a harness to say, 'I'm a working guide dog, please do not distract me.' And I said, is that not enough for you?" And she said, "Well, I'm just going by our policy." And I was like, "Well, it's not right. I've never needed to provide that information." So, cut a long story short, I did a lot of research after I left and realised that they have implemented a new policy change, which came into effect in June last year, whereby they are requesting proof of assistance dogs that have been accredited with AD UK, which is Assistance Dogs UK. So you need to carry the booklet in order for them to allow you in. On the one hand, I can see why they're trying to police this, because I am the first person who doesn't want a fake service dog, if you like, at the next table, because to my guide dog, that is a distraction. And if she's not working, I can't see.
Right.
So it is a problem. I recognise it as a problem. I have experienced it firsthand. However, I don't feel like we should be tarnished with the same brush. As you say, guide dogs they're one of the OG assistance dogs, and it's very blatant by one, the fact I'm visually impaired. I struggled walking into that restaurant. It was difficult for me to navigate through tables. My partner pulled the chair out for me. I was in the middle of trying to connect my meta glasses to the app to access the menu, which I can't see. As the woman approached, she had a fluorescent, nationally recognised harness on from the leading assistance dog charity in the UK, and her behaviour was impeccable. And she's a yellow lab, so you had all of these things up, and I just think at some point some common sense must come into play, and to kind of just judge the situation at the time, but to put down in paper that you must, demand proof. There were people, I think that particular video is at about 850,000 views at the moment, and there's so many people with a variety of disabilities commenting on it. I even had a lot of wheelchair users commenting on it, saying, imagine if we entered and were asked for evidence of our need to use a wheelchair, and it was kind of,
What's the meaning? It's the meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. It was humiliating. It was quite embarrassing. It was the way it was approached as well. Had the member of staff pulled the chair out opposite me and just said, "Look, I really hate to ask, but we have been asked to do this as part of our new policy," and I could have, gone away and, had some conversations with Guide Dogs UK, but she was stood over me, and she was pretty loud, and everybody was watching around us, and
right.
It's very difficult, because I think as a guide dog owner, I don't walk in there thinking this is me and I've got my dog with me, because to me, when we're working, she's not a dog, she's an extension of me, she's my eyes. So if somebody has a problem with that, I don't perceive it as, they probably think in their head, "Oh, there's a dog here, that's a problem." I think I've got a disability and that is the problem, because I don't kind of see us as separate entities, if that makes sense.
Sure.
We come as a package deal, and if she's not there, I can't be there. So it does really hurt, to be asked for evidence. And I think as well, on top of that, to feel the need that you've got to prove yourself and prove your disability and prove your need for an assistance dog to be by your side constantly, it's emotionally exhausting.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. I think that, that, have you gone back to Guide Dogs at all, or Assistance Dogs UK, and talked about this?
Yeah, so I did report it to Guide Dogs UK. They are extremely supportive, and they have helped to guide me through the process. I did log a formal complaint internally with the pub chain. They have came back, reiterated their policy, apologised for any upset, and I have a meeting with their area manager on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And my partner and I have also signed up an online petition for the policy to be revised moving forward, just because of the number of people who it's affecting. And I think this is what's kind of put fire in my bones, is that it's not just an isolated incident. It's not just myself that this has happened to. There are so many assistance dog owners, genuine assistance dog owners, who need their dog by the side to even leave the house on a morning, who have had the same experience. And I just think this has been ongoing for 12 months and nothing's been done about it. And I just think how many more people are going to be affected by it.
Yeah, that's great that you've taken that stand, because I think a lot of people, to your point, don't want the attention, don't want to deal with it, are still struggling with themselves. So advocacy is hard. But you have to make those stands. I went into a restaurant a few weeks back, and after I had a torn labrum in my hip, and then I had the surgery, and so I was on crutches, and I walked up the ramp entrance, because they have a stair entrance and a ramp entrance on either side of the restaurant. And when I get to the top of the ramp, it says handicapped entrance. And I just said, the wording here is really offensive to me. I said, it could be called accessible entrance, or, something like that. It's important to understand the connotations of what a sign says. And, they changed the sign. But if I had never said anything, that sign of handicapped entrance would still be there. And so it's important to be able to know your rights, one, and then be able to advocate for yourself, two, when things offend you or you feel like they're not appropriate to what your circumstance is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think over the years you build up a lot of resilience, don't you? And there's a lot that you go through, and at the time it feels like such a negative experience and such a setback. But each of these things are kind of another building block to the resilience that we build over time. And it's got to a point now where I no longer get emotionally upset in the moment over these things, because I feel like I've desensitized to it, because I'm so used to them happening, which is sad on one hand. But on the other hand, I've got to a point where it kind of motivates me to want to do more, because there are a lot of people in my position with the level of vision that I have who are either, still in that earlier stage of adjusting and accepting. And I think when you're in that space emotionally, it's very difficult to stand up, because I've been there. So I know. And there's also other people who, they might have a learning disability or a communication barrier in addition to their vision impairment. So there's so many of us amongst our community who don't have the ability to stand up and advocate for themselves. So I think if you are in a position to and you feel comfortable to, take a stand for us all. And 6 months ago, I wouldn't have been able to do that because I was very low myself with something else that was going on in life. And having the experience that I had last week in the pub would have knocked me for six, and I would have walked out crying, and I just wouldn't have been in the headspace to tackle it in the way that I am now. So I think it just depends on your mindset at the time, and yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
that makes sense.
Life happens, right? It can
Yeah.
hit you in the butt, or it can give you opportunities. So I think we all go through those for sure. Medical stuff is a challenge by itself, and I think going through your fracture in your back and having that isolation for a long time is its own issue, right? Apart from the vision.
Mm. Yeah, it's been complex. Thankfully, I'm at a place now where I can kind of get myself back out there, and I think this has probably given me the kick that I need. Unfortunately, it was my very first day
Right.
being with my dog in harness again. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's motivated me to, get back on track and get back out there. So
Awesome. Well, you're a great advocate, so I'm sure people are thankful for that. TJ, any final questions for Jo?
I don't think so. We've covered so much, and I thank you so much for all of this information, and I'm looking forward to all the things to come from you. I do want to know more about the app and accessibility for here. I know I was, like Murray said, I went to New York last week actually and found myself prior to going ahead in my City Mapper app and putting in all the places that I knew that I wanted to go and making sure that I mapped that out prior to us getting there. Just, and by the time you get there, it's almost like you're exhausted from doing all the research, and then you got everything's in your mind, and it's, it's like, okay, well, where was this again? Where was that again? So, it's overwhelming. So I love that something like that is happening over there. So keep us posted on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely will. It can be very exhausting, and I think something like this will just make the world a difference for us all.
For sure.
Any final comments from you, Jo? Anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered?
Not that I can think of.
Well, we've covered a lot. But
yeah.
Everyone knows your story inside out now. So I'm prepared to get bombarded by messages and questions.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I will say is I've had a lot of messages from visually impaired people recently who want to get started with content creation on social media, and just don't feel like they have the courage to. But one thing I would say is that if it is a route that you want to go down, just record your first video and get out there, because that is half of the battle. And I know there's so many people who want to get on board with it. And for me, I think the more of us that we have representing and advocating for the community, the better. So if there is anybody watching who, has had that in the back of the mind for a while, I hummed and hawed about it for almost 10 years. And it wasn't until my first guide dog passed away and I thought, oh, what have I got to lose now? But that's when I started to kind of document my journey. So yeah, I think if anybody's wanting to go down that route, just get your first video out and it becomes easier.
And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? As we've all kind of made that decision to do our first video and, want to make it perfect and spend hours on it, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just people like to hear from people, and getting yourself out there and building that community has been great, for everybody in it. Everybody who I talk to said, a lot of people said they've never met somebody else with blindness or low vision. They've been in isolation, since their diagnosis, and it's been so freeing. And so again, this podcast hopes to be able to reach and tell stories that make people feel like it's not as big a deal to do things in their lives as they've built it up to be. So your advice is really empowering. Just get out there and do it, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And same with tennis. I say to people all the time, they're intimidated to play blind low vision tennis, and I say it's fun. Just get out and hit a ball. Like, it doesn't have to be that you're Wimbledon's #1 player. It's that you're getting out in a social setting, you're meeting people with the same challenges as you have, and you're having fun doing something that is also healthy and recreational. So don't put a barrier. All the time we put barriers in front of ourselves not to do things, but when we do them, 9 times out of 10, they're great experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just not worrying about kind of other people's perceptions and just doing, what you've always wanted to really. And every time I see a new creator pop up with their first video, I'm like, oh my word, this is exciting.
I know.
Because I think that the more of us, the merrier. And there's the odd person who's messaged me and they're like, I don't. And I'm like, just do it, please, just do it. And then they message me and they're like, I did it. And then I go watch the video and I'm like, oh my word, another one. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, just get yourselves out there.
Yeah, get out and do it, people. Well, good message.
That's right.
And Joe, thanks so much for being
Yes.
our first international guest. It's been so great to be able to hear your story and hear the things that you've been able to achieve in your life. You should be very proud of your journey, and we hope to be able to close the gap around the world and have more of the international community come on the podcast, because I think it's great to be able to share what's working in one region of the world against another region of the world. And as we've done today, just understand what some of those opportunities are to be able to grow.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And also thank you for having me. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, TJ, your New York trip didn't maybe go as well as planned. Your star player went on the DL the day that
it never fails.
Yankee Stadium.
Yes.
So we're hoping for better travel for you in the future.
Yes, I'm not going to go back to Yankee Stadium though. I'm the bad luck charm apparently, so I'm going to stay away, because 2 years ago, Aaron Judge went on the IL before I got there, and this time he went the day that I got there. So
no more trips for you.
No more. I'm just bad luck, I guess. So.
Awesome. Well, of course, the World Cup is happening. Good luck to England. Good luck. America played very well last night, 1-4-1. So that was a good start for them. Australia plays today. So excited to tackle Turkey. So we'll see how we all go in the World Cup. Joe, thank you again. We really appreciate you coming on. And this episode will be up on Tuesday. Usually we get it up the same day, but my team is on vacation. My content creator just graduated, and so they're taking the weekend off. But we'll put this up on Tuesday, and then we'll be able to put it out to everybody once it comes up through the QR codes, and of course going to the Ameribility Podcast YouTube channel to be able to see it, iTunes and Spotify to listen to it. Thank you again, everybody. Have a lovely weekend, and we'll be in touch on episode 14.
Bye.
Bye.